Hi, everybody. Welcome to Next in Creator Media. I'm Mike Shields, and I'm here with Doug Shapiro. He is a media consultant, part-time advisor to Boston Consulting, and also the author of the very good Substack, The Mediator. Hey, Doug, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mike.
I've been looking forward to talking to you because you've been writing some really intriguing stuff, and we're sort of mind melding a lot. But you are someone who spent a lot of time in and around traditional media companies. And you've been talking about this tension between, I'm often talking about how do brands figure out this creator space, but the big media companies are in a tough spot. So can you talk about this tension that you've seen between corporate media and creator media and the fact that it's a zero sum game? And I'm not always sure that people in the traditional media industry see it that way.
Yeah, I think, all that's accurate. A good representation of certainly the last couple of pieces I've written. As a starting point, I think it's important to understand that the total media business is not really growing on a global basis. It's not growing on a real basis, meaning adjusted for inflation.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because, of course, fundamentally the media business is about monetizing attention and engagement, and attention isn't really growing anymore. So if you look at the time spent with media, certainly in the West, I think there's some interesting Activate data which shows that the average U.S. adult is spending more than 75% of their waking hours with media. I mean, it depends on how you count the the multitasking, but a lot of time. And if you look at a time series of time spent with media, what you could see is that it grew like in the kind of 2008 to 2013 period as mobile usage and penetration picked up. And then it kind of flatlined. Then there was a bump around COVID, and it's been pretty stagnant since. So
we filled in all the gaps at this point. Like we've found all those moments. There's
not that many hours in the day.
Yeah.
And so anyway, if time spent with media isn't growing, it's hard for the whole pie to grow.
Right.
And as a result, when you look at the growth of creator media, and the way I define that, by the way, is there's corporate media or institutional media and everything else. So I'm calling creator media basically everything else. And it's growing much, much faster than the total pie. By my math, it's about $250 billion last year. And growing, it grew about 25% annually over the prior 4 years. And the total pie is only growing 5%. So when you do the math on it, what you see is that creator media is roughly half of the growth, even though it's only, about 10% of the total media pie.
Right.
That's 250 billion relative to 2.5 trillion globally. It's still half the growth.
So, and in terms of consumption, it is taking away from something else at this point, right?
Yeah, there's no more. Yeah. So if you kind of start with, the way I think about it is the volume of creator media is multiples, or in some cases orders of magnitude larger than the volume of corporate media, right? And that's just because of the sheer volume of people, tens of millions of creators around the world making stuff, right? So if you look at YouTube as an example, last year, Hollywood, by my math, put out about 15,000 hours of new TV and film, and there were 300 million hours uploaded to YouTube. And that's an old number, by the way. I bet it's higher now. That's 20,000 times as much. So if you go you look at music, you look at gaming, you can see, and it's pretty intuitive. There's just start with volume. There's vastly more volume. Then you go next from volume to consumption, and not surprisingly, a lot of that creator content doesn't actually get consumed. So, again, by my math, in video at least, what I calculate is about 25% now of all video consumption is social video, is YouTube, TikTok, Reels, whatever. So you kind of you're laddering down from volume, massive, consumption a little bit less, and monetization even less than that. Because as I said earlier, total creator economy revenue is probably about a tenth. So yeah, all of that, because of if you start with the presumption that it's a zero sum game, all of that basically has to come at the expense. Certainly the consumption and the monetization has to come at the expense of traditional institutional media.
And where would you say, you know, in the institutional media world, are they, it's not like they don't know that the creators are a big thing or this is happening. They've been in and out of trying to work with that world for a little while, but have they come to grips with that shift that you're talking about? And that, especially for younger generations, that it's not just extra stuff they do on the side. It's becoming such a, you know, it's a primary form of entertainment. Has that shift happened? There's a lot of that stuff doesn't count as much as our stuff you hear about.
Yeah. I'd say there's a couple of answers there. I think, as you said, there is still a cultural impasse that, if you think about Hollywood, it's self-selecting for people who think they have great taste. Like, you only go into Hollywood if you think you have your finger on the pulse of what other people will enjoy, right? So you're already, you know, have a collection of people who think that. Those are the people who congregate there. And now you're actually ascending in your career. Every step you move up the ladder, it only further reinforces that,
because it was always really hard to get in, and only the best made it, and right, and you made it.
So by the time you're at the top of the pyramid of Hollywood, like, you know, you're already predisposed to think that you have this unique perspective, and you've had many opportunities for that to be reinforced along the way. And so I think there's a certain degree of cognitive dissonance with accepting the fact that some kids in their garage, and, you know, somebody on a skateboard and with a handheld, or somebody with a drone or whatever, is making something that is actually compelling. So I think there's still this view. Plus, you know, the creator economy, just because it's just this, you know, complete scrum of people, like, you know, there's no entry requirements in there.
Yes.
Is that you have some kind of, you know, some less than tasteful stuff happens, and, you know, there's certainly people who are,
the range is very wide. Let's say
range is super wide, and so there's plenty of stuff to point to say, you know,
it's all garbage.
It's garbage. Yeah. You know, that person's a huckster. They're self-promotional. They're, you know, what Justine Bateman said recently is about the whatever creator A list that Hollywood Reporter put out. I think she said, you know, this isn't Hollywood. These are infomercial spokespeople, right? So there's still that element of, there's a cultural impasse, right? I think that's one thing. The second thing is, you know, I think you just need to be realistic about the challenges, that it's just a very different animal, right? It's a different market structure, sort of like an infinite competitive set.
Yeah.
And if you grew up with a handful of competitors in movie studios or music labels or you know, video game publishers, and now you're competing with an infinite army of creators, you know, I've made this joke a few times that in traditional media, there's still this kind of, like, you know, Game of Thrones analogy that it's the Lannisters versus the Starks versus the Sea Snake versus, you know, whatever. But the army of the dead is amassed at the wall, you know, and so there's still this kind of myopic view, but you know, so it's just a very different market structure. It's very different monetization, obviously. You know, a lot of these the traditional media business have dual or tri revenue streams. Like, they have transactional, subscription, advertising supported. You know, the creator economy is mostly ad supported. It doesn't monetize as highly per unit of consumption, unit of time, right? So it's just not, you know, it's just not as much, it's just not as profitable for the effort. There's a different balance of power because there's just so much power in the big gatekeepers, right?
Yes.
And there's a different audience that wants a different thing. So, like, when you add it all up, it's just a really hard thing to do. And as you said, they've tried. Like, you know, obviously, everybody in traditional media is aware of it. You know, they use it as a marketing channel. They use it sometimes for franchise development. You'll see, like, you know, the Talking Dead or the Walking Dead Red Machete, or, you know, have like, you'll have like adjunct programming that's meant to, which I guess is an extension of marketing. You have some talent development, some efforts to cross people over. You have a D'Amelio's, you have Lily Singh, you have some of that stuff, which has been, if you're not careful and it's not authentic to the creator's brand, it doesn't always work. So there's kind of a mixed track record there. You look at Beast Games, which is a big swing, and we'll see how
it's coming
it
up
goes.
next week. It's sort of the latest biggest example of, and we're calling out, in this case it's Amazon, not old school media company, but big media trying to bring these worlds together.
Yeah. So I think it's I think going through it, you'd say, number one, there's a cultural impasse, and just number two, it's a very different business and it's really hard to do. So there's a little bit of like, it is what it is. And I don't think it's, if you were to say, oh, well, and maybe this is the next question, what should the big media companies do? I don't think there's a lot of like easy, obvious answers. It's not like these people are not stupid, right? They're not leaving a big opportunity untouched just because of, pride or myopia or whatever. It's just a different animal, and it's challenging.
All right, I am going to ask that question in a second, but hold that thought, because I just want to dig into something else you've written recently. I think it was back in August. You just talked about, it's not only that the dynamics of the business and the consumption patterns are so different, but this younger consumer, I think it seems faddish if you'd like to hope this is going to go away, you think it's faddish that they don't care so much about professionalism. They favor this authenticity in their content, and they like that like dopamine per minute viewing experience. Can you talk about that? Like, cause that is a big difference. And I think people might hope that is just a product of youth or the moment, but that could fundamentally change what people expect from media and look for, right?
Yeah, something that I write about often is this idea of a changing consumer definition of quality. And I think a big problem in any domain is that if you've been in it for a long time, you tend to get kind of anchored to a definition of quality. And in the TV business, and I experienced this when I was at Turner, I remember running this big project, and we had a lot of senior executives there, and it came around to this question of whether quality was changing. And for them, quality is really defined by like an HBO show, right? It's very high production values, brand name showrunner, brand whatever, household name actors, etc. But one of the things that happens, particularly when disruption occurs, one of the things that happens is that new entrants will come in with new attributes, new features, and if those resonate with consumers, they will change the definition of quality.
Yeah.
And I've used this example before, but it just always strikes me as a good one, which is Airbnb. When Airbnb emerged, it just seemed like a horrible idea. To the idea that
someone's house, what?
Someone's
like
house,
I love my high-end hotel. What are you
talking about? Or you use their bathroom? Like who? And it's just like, what are you talking about, right? But in the process, as Airbnb has grown and matured and become entrenched in society, it's changing the definition of lodging, because it's introduced all these new attributes like having a full working kitchen, or being in a clean neighborhood, or having a driveway or room to entertain, all these things, right? And so if there's a lot of people now where when they're traveling, their first stop
that is luxury, that is like a great experience,
luxury, or the first place they go to Airbnb.com. They don't go to Marriott or Hilton. They don't go to Bonvoy or whatever.
Right.
And so that's what's happening in media too, that the advent of Netflix introduced new attributes of quality, right? All of a sudden, like product mattered, right? Like the UI, UX mattered, being ad-free mattered, how many episodes were stacked. I remember when people would say, well, I won't start a show unless I know all the seasons are available. Like that didn't exist when we had 4 networks that you flicked on your, on your TV. And then with with social video, the same thing is that now you have attributes like authenticity and relatability and digestibility and social currency and, low friction and all this other stuff, and dopamine, like you said, dopamine. And so, the way I think about quality, and I should have said this first, is that if you think about it not as a value judgment, but as revealed preference, as what people actually choose when given a choice, then it's very clear that the definition of quality is changing. So if you come home and you slump on the couch and the remote is within arm's reach, and Netflix and Max and Disney Plus and the whole world awaits you on that remote, but you pick up your phone and you start flicking through, Reels for 20 minutes, you have just said that Reels is higher quality.
What I want to do right now. It's making me happy.
What I want to do in this moment, you see this need state, this whatever, this context. And so I don't think that's, you could ask, is that demographic or is it generational? Meaning if it's generational, then it's going to change. People are going to grow up and have these kids will all suddenly be watching, Lester Holt on the NBC Nightly News or whatever.
Right. You just age into certain things.
Or it's demographic. And then if you say it's, demographic, then it's maybe I flip those around. Anyway, point being, I don't think this is, it's the same thing with there was a long time when people thought no one was going to cut off their wireline phone for wireless, right? Because the quality was lower, because it might drop calls and, and sometimes it's staticky and all that.
Right.
And, we've seen what's happened to wireline phone penetration in the United States. So I don't think this is a fad. I think it's quite sustainable. And I don't think once the definition of quality starts to shift, I don't see what the case is for it to shift back in a dramatic way.
Now, okay, here's the really hard question, right? What do traditional media companies do about this, if anything? Because you're like you said, the time is getting taken away from them, especially younger demographics. They are often YouTube or TikTok centric, or they go back and forth and don't think it's a big trade down. It's not as though, the traditional media companies, they tried this 10 years ago. They bought Maker Studio, Disney bought Maker Studios and Full Screen. And like you mentioned, Lily Singh had a show on NBC. She was a YouTuber. They've tried stuff. It hasn't worked. It's not clear to me what they do now. Do they try and bring more creators to television like Beast Games? Do they try and make their UIs a little bit more TikTok-y? Like, what the hell do they do, if there's an answer?
As I said before, I don't think there are easy answers. I think that they could make more concerted efforts to cross over creator stars. So backing up, I think that it's hard to have a big enough funnel to catch all these people, right? But I think that they could do a better job. Or if you use music as an analogy, the A&R business forever was you'd send some A&R rep to a smoky bar at 3 a.m. and they'd discover something undiscovered act. And now it's become a data mining exercise. You see who's trending on YouTube and SoundCloud and all that. So I think there could be a much more concerted effort to do that in video as well, to be really mining social for emerging stars. I think that's one thing. And then trying to cross them over in authentic ways. Not everyone could be Mr. Beast, right? We use him all the time as an example, and he's so unique that maybe we shouldn't. Yeah, we shouldn't. And but you look at Whistle, you look at Dude Perfect, and you look at, the good golf, and, there's definitely stars that could cross over. So I think that's one thing. There's also a question about, could you lean into social distribution more? Could you ever think about social as a downstream window? Would you actually start distributing content in snippets, in Quibi style snippets? You've seen this growth, the growth of these short form drama networks.
Yeah, it's very
that
big in Asia, but it's
big in
like
Asia. Yeah, I get,
crazy fast cut
real and
soap opera kind of things.
exactly. Yeah. I think Paramount did a stunt where when Mean Girls 2 came out, they basically put out the first Mean Girls on TikTok in little snippets. Is that a big business? No, that's still probably another form of marketing. Is there a lot of, is that a lot of monetization? I don't know. The biggest swing would be things like, rolling up influencer marketing agencies or, pushing
I was going to
harder
ask you
into
about that.
social.
Is there almost a renewed MCN play where that model didn't really work? But is there some alternative where they get to roll up 10 really important influencers in a particular category and sell them and use them as like the farm team?
Yeah, I think there's an argument that the MCN should come back probably in a new form. One of the biggest challenges with the MCNs was that it was an agency business and they didn't own any equity in the talent. And so as soon as anyone hit it, they were like, they had all the bargaining power. So I think a revised MCN model where you actually own some of the equity. I know there's people trying to do that where you own some of the equity in creators. I think it's an opportunity, but the question is, could you more actively bundle if you're already selling? That brand dollars are moving away from traditional TV. You're already selling bundles of traditional linear inventory and now digital inventory. And is there an opportunity to bundle in influencer marketing? There is already branded content to varying degrees. So, but does that solve the problem? So if you start out where the point of the recent piece that I wrote, which I think was called the relentless, inevitable march of the creator economy. Then none of this is going to solve the problem. I think I think there's a degree of inevitability about this, hence the title of that piece. It's just a question of how do you harness it? If you're a traditional media company, how do you harness it as best you can?
You made me think of this, but earlier this year, Publicis bought Influential, which has been around for a long time. It's a social media agency network of sorts. I wouldn't have thought of this, but what if a big media company had made that kind of acquisition? That's kind of like not their game, but that would have been an interesting way to both bring the marketing services thing to bear and also get closer to that talent. I wonder if something like that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of thing. Those are the kind of the bigger, bolder bets. Those are the kinds of bolder bets that I think they need to be thinking about.
I want to just dig into something that's interesting. It disturbed me a little bit having three boys that are already getting like sucked into these worlds. This addiction to dopamine that we may be creating with this generation or two. Whether or not that's actually good for people, I don't know, but can you make media that serves that? Can the traditional media companies find a way to tap into that? Is that just totally unique to feed-driven algorithmic media? Can anything be done about that?
It's again difficult. It's difficult to compete, just because a lot of what drives dopamine is variable rewards. This is why people sit at slot machines and just keep pulling. And there's all these studies about rats generate a lot more dopamine, or pigeons when they tap the lever, and there's sort of like a randomness to when the pellets come out.
Yeah.
So you have variable rewards because you don't know what you're going to get. You have a much faster payoff because these things, you can tell. I forget what the stat is, but the average reel or short, I think, is only watched for, I forget what it was, like 8 seconds, 6 seconds. It's something ridiculous. So like you're making a decision really quickly whether this is worth your time or not. And then you have the algorithm, and the algorithm has a massive amount of signal. I think Scott Galloway talks about signal liquidity. You think about the signal liquidity on Netflix and how many choices you're making versus the signal liquidity in TikTok and how many choices you're making per hour. And it's, again, it's orders of magnitude more. So between the variable rewards, the speed of payoff, and just the, algorithmic signal liquidity, there's such an structural advantage that short form video has such a structural advantage in terms of optimizing dopamine. It's really hard to compete with that when you're talking about any kind of long form narrative content where you have to like have plot development and character development and build
it's
toward
talking
a
about playing a
climax.
different sport than making
with,
NCIS, or even having a streaming app. It's a completely different game.
It's a completely different game. Yeah. I think it kind of, look, we have gambling and vaping and porn and, we got a lot of things that there's a lot of industries that exist to capitalize on, on human frailty, really.
Right. And that might not be what the entertainment industry is good at. I don't know.
I mean, I think the entertainment industry would say that's not the case. I think the entertainment industry would say, I think ultimately what you're getting at is, I think there is and always has been in entertainment a tension between art and commerce.
Yeah.
And I think in Hollywood, there's a lot of people who believe very strongly in the art of it, or at least there's a pretense that it's art. There's a lot of trappings of art, and there's still a lot of, dismissiveness of people who do things that are kind of, baldly commercial, right?
Right.
Robert De Niro does some, you can see that in the culture, right? Like some actor Ryan Gosling chooses to work at scale for some like project he really believes in, as opposed to doing, a superhero movie.
Yeah.
And everyone loves him because he's an artist, right?
Right.
And what we're talking about is, it is more overtly commercial. It's really, and so anyway, I think that's another problem. And you help me kind of just talking through it. You help me refine it. But I think that's also that's at the heart of the tension in traditional media, is that because it still wants so much of it, or so many of the people who are involved still want to believe it's an art form, that it's very hard for them to embrace this such an explicitly commercial part of the business. So yeah, it's like I said before, there are no easy answers here.
Last question. In the creator, you mentioned you have your definition of it, and people will quibble with how many creators there are. You're starting to see, you mentioned, obviously Mr. Beast is in his own league, Dude Perfect, others who are getting the funding and becoming, semi-professional to very professional organizations or operations. I guess how big do you think that can get? And are we going to see, is that a handful? Is that 20? Is that, like, we're going to see a bunch of these stars become, production companies or legitimate media entities over time?
Well, I think it's really, I think that's hard to say. I think it's going to get very blurry in the middle. You already have a lot of big directors and showrunners have their own production businesses,
right.
And Will Smith has his, and J.J. Abrams has his, and there's Agbo, and there's James Cameron, like, they all, there's Plan B or whatever the Brad Pitt thing is. So it's very common for traditional talent to try to take more control of, to kind of integrate up the stack in a way, right? To take more control over the creative process, to own more of the equity effectively. And so that starts to bleed into these creators who were, one person shops, and then start to professionalize, add some kind of infrastructure around themselves. And so at some point in the middle there, they start to intersect. I don't know what Mr. Beast's annual budget is, but I'm sure it's converging on, it's probably converging on the annual budget of some of these, some of these, brand name Hollywood production studios.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think, and to go further, I think that we haven't talked at all about generative AI, and it's actually very hard to have a conversation and not talk about AI.
I don't know how we did that so far.
Yeah, we haven't
but
gotten to
that's
that,
only going to increase the output here from some of these.
Increase the output, but it's also I think it's going to empower more traditional talent to start to move away from Hollywood and think about, well, instead of making a show and going to streamer X and saying, hey, can I get a couple points on this? And they say, well, sure, here's the points if it goes 1 season, 2 seasons, 3 seasons, 4 seasons, and then they cancel it after 2 because it's going to be too, they lose, they lose creative control. I could see, you're going to see, I think, more traditional talent kind of move into that middle space of more equity ownership, more control.
Right.
So I think
are they becoming creators? Well, it's great.
Yeah. I think there's going to be a room for. I think there's going to be a very large middle space here of, small production teams, whether they came from the head of the curve or whether they come from the bottom of the curve and move up. I think there's tons of space for that.
All right, Doug, great stuff. Awesome conversation. Everyone check out the Mediator. Thank you so much for your time here. Let's talk again.
Yeah, it's a deal. Thanks, Mike.